Okay. And all right, so hey everyone, hope you're doing well. This is our third meeting. Going to be discussing various topics related to cognitive conditions and disabilities. And getting started, we're going to kind of continue where we left off with last meeting because unfortunately we ran out of time, so we did not get to cover TBI and ABI. So getting started with that, starting with traumatic brain injury, that is usually caused by some form of physical trauma to the head that results in some injury or other changing of the physical brain structure, versus acquired brain injury is more like a non-traumatic, so it's not necessarily caused by like a direct force, it's more just either acquired through various conditions or diseases, or it could be caused by things such as strokes, like a lack of oxygen to the brain. And so symptoms are wide-ranging and often correlate with the area to the brain that was damaged in the case of TBI or ABI. And so that can range from anywhere to physical symptoms to mental symptoms. It's a very wide-ranging. Deficits in communication and higher level of cognitive functioning, such as like personality, are often affected. And there's been quite a few case studies on that. And so with treatment, certain medications can help, as well as PT. So for instance, if a person loses their sense of motor coordination after acquiring an injury, or after having some direct force, they may go through occupational therapy. So such as the picture on the right, you can see the bottom right, that would be a person going through occupational therapy in order to kind of like regain some of the function that they had previously lost. And so often these rehabilitation teams have multiple people like kind of working together. So you have psychologists, occupational therapists, physical and speech therapists, a whole bunch of people, because the effects of ABI and TBI are so broad that you need multiple professions all kind of working together to give treatment. And so our guest speaker, his name is Mr. Paul Bosworth, and he, as you can see just from his CV that he sent me, is quite extensive. He's been doing a lot in terms of advocating for people with TBI and ABI. And his story he'll kind of get into in our interview. He used to work in this really big company, this multi-million-dollar company, and he had an accident, and which he will describe in the video, and talks about like after that moment how he felt with the hospitals and the treatment that he was given, and how he was inspired to kind of like take a step towards advocating for not only himself but for others. And so that's led him to write several books, to create a brain injury support group in Lafayette, which is called the AMAZE Foundation. And as you can see there, that's their mission statement. And so he's also worked with Senate and a whole bunch of other people in order to try and support and raise awareness for brain health. So I'm going to play his interview that I had the pleasure of having with him. So give me just 1 second. Okay. All right. So hey everyone, this is Mr. Paul Bosworth. He is our second presenter. He's here today to talk to us about various forms of brain injury. He's going to give us some of his personal background and tell us about the work he does with the AMAZE Foundation here in Lafayette, and as well some tips for inclusivity and advocacy that we can implement in our day-to-day lives. So thank you, Mr. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. Appreciate the time, Beacon Club. So, want to keep this short and sweet. September 11, 2007, I was working for top 10 IT corporation in the world, and food got stuck in my throat. The world went to black, and I got up and I passed out. It took me years to fill in the rest of the story, but the short story is I freed the blockage in my throat, which caused 4 ribs, and called my girlfriend because it was no big deal. It just conked my head. And she brought me to a Trauma 1 center in Washington, D.C. area where I used to live, and I had my traumatic brain injury. It's a severe concussion, basically, and without oxygen. So lack of oxygen plus blunt trauma was a recipe for me to bounce myself out of a 6-figure-year job. And went to a Trauma 1 center, treated and released within 6 hours, but my girlfriend walked out with big eyes. She was frightened. She was physically frightened. She had the responsibility of a human on her shoulders because there was, and not really is today, enough protocol to keep a person that has had such a traumatic event. And you can start counting the notes on advocacy. So there's no, we're just getting to the point 13 years later that we have a test that's a backup test, and they're using it in the field in our military for concussions. Otherwise, you're just told to wait. And that's basically what I was told, is to wait. So I thought, great, I have a vacation for 2 weeks. We'll go to this and we'll go to that. But I noticed that anytime I went to some place that was noisy, I was overwhelmed with symptoms. My stutter would come out. I would walk into walls. And by the way, the whole time I looked just fine. And really didn't have a clue, but I would sleep for 14 hours. Probably some of you students do that anyway. But yeah, it was Mr. Toad's wild ride. I didn't have a set. This is what's going to happen. Then this happens. Then this happens. It was me against medical science, and medical science is going, I've never seen. We're not sure, and that you can only imagine scared the living daylights out of me. So went and saw a doctor friend that I met through this girlfriend that I had. She was managing me all the time. And he said, you have post-concussive syndrome. I said, can I test out of it? Can I get out of it? Is there a pill? Can I just take a pill and be done with it? And he said, not exactly. And since I was so high functioning, I couldn't go back to where I just spent the last 3 years in training, heavily in training, to figure out how to run my $12 million territory in Washington, D.C. area. So it took a move back home to South Louisiana. I'm from New Orleans, and it took a lot of friends helping me try and shape what had just happened to me. And I thought, I'm pretty well educated, college grad, the whole nine. Let's figure this out. And it took 2 years just for me to understand that I was in the middle of something that medical science doesn't understand. Oh dear. And by the way, they covered it for 5 minutes. Concussions go away eventually. And sometimes they do. But sometimes they don't. And when they don't, we end up in the position of getting bullied, getting berated, losing family members, losing friends. Because basically, if you have a traumatic event like this, your whole DNA changes, your structure changes. You're still the same person, but what you are able to do and what you're not able to do changes drastically. And so I moved back home, as I mentioned a minute ago, and I was in one of the largest hospitals here in town. And long story short, I was there to dial into a meeting because I wanted to get my brain back. That was my job. My job for the rest of my life was to get my brain back. Even though I looked fine, I still had some over 30 symptoms that I dealt with, and they would come out randomly. So this lady was holding court, and she said, brain injury meeting. She was in the lobby there, and I said, do you know anything about the brain injury meeting? She said, oh, yeah, honey, I'm supposed to be running it. I don't see anybody here. And was hiding from the world, because that's what you do when you have a bad stutter and you don't want to talk to anybody. And I looked at her and I said, "Hi, my name is Paul. I'm a brain injury survivor." And she reared back and she said, "I would have never known." I'm like, don't ever say that to a person that's conked their head hard enough that they're presenting symptoms. That's the worst. It's like telling a cancer survivor you look fine. Internally, they have chaos and worry and fear and all kinds of other chemical stuff. So with that said, a couple of weeks later, I realized that the hospital was doing the best that they could, and this woman did the best that she could, gave them all forgiveness, and started a group called the AMAZE Brain. It used to be a brain injury group, but now it's a brain health group. We're focused on getting a better brain. We're focused on moving on. I do have my story. It is on YouTube in 6 parts. If you want to go look, Paul Bosworth, pretty straightforward. You can go watch it. It's in 20-minute increments, because a brain injury survivor is not going to have that focus to last more than 20 minutes. Do they have ADHD? I don't know. Do they have developmentally delayed? I don't know. But all these little symptoms and all these little labels being thrown at me, and like, "Oh, well, you're over 40. That's because you're..." No, it's not because I was over 40. Anyway, dig further in and got into a national organization called Brain Injury Association of America. So I go and see what the lawmakers are doing and what the movers and shakers are doing. And I learned about oxygen therapy, which is the reason why you can understand what I'm saying. Otherwise, I'd be growling and spitzing and starting and trying to start saying words, aphasia. I have friends over at the communication disorders clinic over there on UL's campus. They know who I am. Done well over 30 talks to large groups, anywhere from 5 to 400. And when I do that, there's always somebody with a tear down their eye, because they've been told to wait. And that wait is way too long. And they're having issues with their spouse. They're having issues with function. They're tripping and they're falling for random reasons. This is the topic of what's going on today, because you're going to see a lot of supplements being thrown into media and social media and your phone, because we're desperately, all of a sudden, desperately trying to figure out this brain that we have and making it better. Be cautious, be aware. There is something called CBD. There is something called medical marijuana that is bouncing people out of pain clinics. And that's something that I sincerely love, because I hated pain clinics. It's not where it is today. Is 36 states have legalized it in one way, shape, or form. In your world, at 20, whatever, it's all fun and giggles. But in my world, my people are getting off of these heavy-duty drugs that are clogging up their system. And my joke is the hippies always win. I'm a hippie, I can say that. So advocacy, we also pop a tent at the farmer's market. We advocate eating locally. So locally produced foods in our own soil will feed us better, because we are local. That is a scientific fact. So if you get your greens and your tomatoes and even your meats, if it's locally produced, it's going to feed you better. Water is your friend. When you're taking exams and what have you, and you need a boost, water back. So do a water back on a cup of coffee. Have your cup of coffee and then follow it with at least 8 ounces of water, because that's going to get your body going. With that said, I can keep going for more minutes than this, but if you see somebody that's conked their head, and it's not always a football player, hockey is deep in denial, give them a break. Give them some patience. Give them a minute. Because what I ended up landing in was the wrong place. I ended up landing in a psychologist's office. I landed in a psychiatrist's office. I was given chill pills to shut me up. And little did I know that I was going to end up talking to you guys today. No, I'm not getting shut up. But the pills that I was given made things worse. And that's on an ongoing basis because, again, I changed that DNA up. That strand is different than it was before. And who knows? Who knows if they've even tested this particular drug that I'm taking on a person that's had a brain injury. And there's so many of them. Every one of them is different. If you're interested in having a longer conversation, please let me know. I'm happy to do it. It's number 2 out of the top 3 reasons for people to go on disability and cause of death, as per NASHIA. It's a National Association for Head Injury Administrators. It's the top 3, and you've got people all around you. You have athletics, you have military, you have people that get into car wrecks. Really good incentive not to have the phone in front of you and texting while you drive, because when you do that, your forehead's going to get it. It just will. It's this thing called inertia, this thing called movement, and when you stop and run into somebody, your head's going to hit either the dashboard, the wheel itself, or heaven forbid, go through the windshield. We do look normal after that, but the function's not there, and that's what's been overlooked for so very long. You're welcome to reach out to me. Wade's got my information. With that, I'm going to be so grateful that you were interested in this. This is the biggest secret I've ever fell into. It's been a struggle. It took 5 years to find that oxygen therapy. It took 8 years to realize that I not only hit one side of my head, but the other side of my head. Chiropractors are my heroes. The people that are off label, the people that are not covered by insurance, are the people that are helping the most. And so I take this information. It's not just being bowled over into your lap, but I take it to lawmakers' environs to try and get them to hem it into one of these bills. Pull it in, tuck it into one of the bills, just to see how oxygen therapy changes people's lives. I'm going to continue on my path, and it's simply answering the phone. I'm the guy to call. When the person's angry enough and their spouse or their loved one is not the same anymore, and we've done finished, call Paul. He's got something for you. So to say I'm blessed is an understatement. But I'm sharing that with the next person because that's what I was taught to do at IBM. Later it became Lenovo, but that's what I was taught to do is you know something, you share it. And as you share it, mankind gets boosted. Thank you very much. I appreciate it greatly.
Thank you, Mr. Paul. It's great hearing your insight, and I look forward to any collaborations we can have together in the future.
Cool. Appreciate it.
All right, so yeah, that was Mr. Paul. I think from his testimony, it really highlighted how under the radar a lot of these things can go. For instance, he didn't know the extent of his TBI until much later on, as well as the treatments for that. And I think similar to what Dr. Rydell will say later in this presentation, just highlights the need for the virtue of patience and understanding and work. Getting to know the person as they may themselves not quite understand their situation or even what's going on, and so just being that supportive figure in their life would be so beneficial. So our next topic is intellectual disabilities. And so similar to TBI and ABI, there's not one specific cause. It can result either from genetics or chromosomal implications. It can be the result of TBI or ABI, kind of like what we talked about earlier. Exposure to teratogens in gestation or birth, like exposure to lead. That's actually how we figured out that a Japanese researcher figured out that lead is harmful to humans because it caused intellectual disability in a large group of people in Japan, as well as other environmental factors. And intellectual disability is often comorbid with other conditions such as autism spectrum disorder or ASD. And so there are so when we talk about intellectual, what that means is that there's two primary areas that are impacted or affected. So we have intellect, which is kind of like raw intelligence, or what we think of as book smart. So like processing speed, capacity, so like how many things you can focus on at one point in time, raw memory, things like that. Like when you say like, oh, that person's smart, kind of like what you think of. And then the other is adaptation, and that's basically changing your behavior to succeed in the environment. And so that's what we would colloquially call street smarts. It also, social and practical skills, so like everyday living, those kinds of skills falls into that category of adaptation. And so the way that we diagnose intellectual disabilities is often through using developmental milestones. And what those are is basically, so it's thought that, a child at around this age, like at 2 years old should exhibit certain behaviors. And if they do not, then that may be indicative that there's some form of delay going on. And so that raises inquiries as to why isn't this child, exhibiting some behavior. And so with intellectual disability, it's not always immediately determined in a young age, because the extent of the impact on the intellect may only reveal itself later in life whenever there's new challenges in the environment. So for instance, someone may not know that they have an intellectual disability until later, like in high school or college, whenever there's like a greater academic strain, things like that. There's three major classifications for intellectual disabilities: mild, moderate, and severe. The vast majority of people that have intellectual disabilities are in the mild category. And the way we would determine these three classifications is often through a variety of tests given by a doctor and a psychologist. It does not rely solely on IQ. It used to, and there's still some reports saying that to be diagnosed with intellectual disability, you have to have an IQ of between 50 and 70. From what I understand, the way it was explained to me, that's not quite the case anymore. It's still a factor, but it's not solely on IQ anymore. So for instance, if they were to have a lower than average IQ, but still function perfectly well in day-to-day life, then, we wouldn't really say that's an intellectual disability. Adaptive functioning is kind of determined in the same way, so through tests, but also with the addition of interviews and consultations with family members to kind of like see, like I was saying, if they're living life perfectly fine, content, then that's that. For intellectual disabilities, they're typically chronic or lifelong, and so there's no like Mr. Bosworth was saying, there's no miracle pill that you just take and your symptoms are relieved or anything like that. It's typically educational services and residential services that are given just to promote either self-advocacy, life skills, other things like that. Inclusion is super beneficial. So just because people, learn from others, observational learning is such a powerful way of learning new behaviors. So inclusion-based interventions often work really well, just for anybody, me, you, Joe down the street, anybody really. And also early interventions are extremely important. So the sooner you can identify children with intellectual disabilities, the sooner you can get started on these special education services or life skills training, social inclusion services, things like that. That YouTube video, I really want to play it, so I'm going to see how much time we have. I often run into the problem of I want to show you guys so much, but there's only so much I can do in an hour. So if I have time, I'll go back to it. If not, I'll probably share it on next week's email. But it's a woman talking about her experience with intellectual disability. It's a TED Talk, and kind of like how she originally became a Special Olympian and then utilized that to promote advocacy. It's such a great story. And I did not realize just how much Special Olympics did, and because they provide healthcare for their athletes, which they normally would not receive. And so that they go into about how there's all these undiagnosed medical concerns that aren't normally picked up because a lot of doctors don't feel that they're qualified to treat a person with an intellectual disability, even though there's like no foundation to that claim. And so I was like, whoa, that's, totally awesome and amazing. And so I'm really hoping that as COVID returns to normal and more Special Olympics events will continue, that we at Beacon can try to help out where we can. So moving on to the next topic, we have learning disabilities, and similar to the other conditions we discussed today, can be caused by a variety of factors, such as like genetic conditions or some neurobiological or neurochemical factor. Something to note is that a learning disability is unique in the sense that it is not the product of some other condition. So for instance, if a child has an intellectual disability, that does not automatically guarantee them or qualify them for a learning disability. Same thing with ADD or ADHD. However, learning disorders are often comorbid, meaning that people have two diagnoses or conditions at the same time. But for a person to have a learning disability, it has to be separate from an intellectual disability. And so learning disabilities they used to be defined as this discrepancy between a child's IQ score and what they should be expected to do. So for instance, if they had an IQ in the typical range of around 100, but then struggled with a certain task such as reading, even after being directly intervened, that was thought to be a learning disability. That's not really the case anymore. Nowadays, it's more holistic and seen just as a disorder characterized by difficulties or struggles in certain areas regarding learning, such as language comprehension, spoken or written, which is commonly called dyslexia. And we'll get into these more specific diagnoses in the next slide. Mathematical calculations, so dyscalculia, spatial processing, and then other higher cognitive functioning like planning or decision making is often impacted. And so the way that people in education often diagnose learning disabilities, or at least identify students with potential learning disabilities, is called the response to intervention model. And so that's basically where it's a three-tiered system where in tier 1, you have all students being taught the same instruction from a teacher. And if certain children are, not getting the material or struggling with it, they're taken into a separate classroom so there's less people, it's more one-on-one with a teacher, and they're given more intense structure to their learning. And so this is kind of done to see, is this indicative of a learning disorder that they're struggling, or is it something else? Is it some factors in the home? Are they not getting enough sleep or adequate nutrition, things like that? And so when they're given more intensive education and instruction, if the results improve, they're moved back to tier 1. If not, if they continue to do poorly, then they're moved to tier 3, which is basically one-on-one. Whereas tier 2 is kind of like one teacher to a few students. Tier 3 is one-on-one, and that's considered at risk for a learning disability. And then personnel such as the school psychologist, a speech therapist, parents, teachers, all get together and assess whether a child may have a learning disability. So the whole idea is basically if they're non-responsive to that intervention, so it doesn't matter how many times or attempts you make to teach this specific material, if they still struggle with it, then that may be indicative of a learning disability. And so learning disabilities affect more than just academic success. We often think of learning disabilities as it only affects them getting an A in math class, but that's not really the case, especially when we consider that the difficulties are in language comprehension, so that we use language every day and every moment of every day and across a variety of settings, so that goes beyond school. Same thing with mathematical calculations. And so the idea of neurodiversity applies here. That's kind of like a more recent movement. So similar to autism spectrum disorder, it's this idea that it's not that they're thinking wrong or thinking badly. It's just that they think in a different way, and that's total. And I think it's a great way to view it. It's not some problem that needs to be oh, take this pill and get fixed. It's no, especially from an education standpoint, it's not so much you need to learn how I teach, but I need to teach how you learn, those kinds of things. And so getting on to these specifics like diagnoses of learning disabilities, the current diagnostic terminology is called a specific learning disorder. So there's it's not just learning disability, it's specific learning disorder within a certain area. So dyslexia is probably the most common or most popular, is characterized by difficulties in language processing and reading skills. So struggling with spelling, identifying letters or words, and they may have difficulties recognizing phonemes and phonological rules. And so like phonemes, if you don't know, are kind of like the smallest unit of a word that produces a change in the word. So for instance, if I say I run, that's like me saying I'm running now. Or if I said I ran, I changed the U to an A. So just one tiny little sound changes it now. Instead of talking about me doing something now, I'm talking about me doing it in the past. And so individuals with dyslexia may struggle to kind of like identify that change in phonemes, and that may lead to impairments in language production and comprehension. And so orthographic processing is also associated with dyslexia, and that's kind of like having trouble associating a certain letter with a particular sound. So that's like, having struggle with, I can recognize the letter L, but I struggle with knowing like what it sounds like in my mind and like producing that sound. Dysgraphia is another common or popular learning disability, and that's typically with handwriting and fine motor coordination. And that's not necessarily them like holding their pencil wrong. Like for me, I just grew up, I learned to hold my pencil wrong, and my handwriting is really, really bad. That doesn't mean I have dysgraphia. I mean, not that I know of anyway, but it's essentially just difficulties in the memorization of the way letters are formatted and retrieving that from their memory, as well as just difficulties in fine motor coordination in general. Dyscalculia is kind of like dyslexia, but for math. And so it's specifically with mathematical calculations, and it's kind of like having trouble with number sense. So like, some people can just rattle off the multiplication table like that, it's easier for them, whereas others may struggle with that, with significant impairments in those kinds of math sense would be evidence of dyscalculia, or like not being able to look at a few books on your table and recognize that, oh, that's 7 books. If you had to sit there and count it every time, if you just didn't have a general sense in that kind of like spatial / math awareness, that would be evidence of dyscalculia. And so these two are a little less well known. So we have oral written language disorder and specific reading comprehension deficit, and then nonverbal learning disabilities. For oral written language disorder and specific reading comprehension deficit, it's kind of like difficulties in comprehending and producing written language. So like difficulties with semantics and syntax. So semantics is like the vocabulary we use and like how we use to express our thoughts. So like if I say I'm hungry, I know to use the words like I to represent myself and hungry to represent that like I need something to eat. And syntax is the way a sentence is arranged. So like saying I am hungry versus like hungry am I in English. So difficulties with those two things are characteristic of that specific condition. It's very similar to dyslexia. For nonverbal learning disabilities, this is specifically for recognizing like body language and facial expression cues and like other social like reading the room type stuff. It's relatively new and has not been added to the DSM-5 yet. It does sound very close to autism spectrum disorder. I'm not sure of the discrepancies between the two, so I'd be curious to see how that plays a factor. And I'm sure that may be why it's not in the DSM-5 yet. Is they're still trying to figure out like how is this unique from other, because like we said earlier, if the difficulties can be explained by another disorder. So for instance, if we think, oh, this child is having trouble like with understanding body language or facial cues, is this indicative of a nonverbal learning disability or autism spectrum disorder, or both, So those little nuances are still being kind of like ironed out, if that makes any sense. This YouTube video I'll play in just a minute. So I'm going to give you guys some time. If you have paper and pencil, it's like a demonstration of what it's like to take notes with dyslexia, and I'll be doing it too. So I think it'll be super fun. So if you guys want to like grab paper and pencil while I play it and kind of join along, it might help to like foster some empathy. But in the meantime, there's no, once again, no miracle cure for learning disabilities. People often learn to live with them through various interventions and practices. I can remember my sister, she has dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, and she had to learn special ways to write and to read in a certain way in order to, I guess keep up, if that makes any sense. I don't really like to phrase it like that. but in order for her to succeed educationally. And accommodations are also a really big thing. So like for my sister, she struggled with written language, but hearing and auditory was something she excelled at. So whenever she applied for college, I guess the college she attended to, I guess, didn't have accommodations for like already built in for like them to read the questions to her. So I actually went and read some of those questions to her so that she could answer them more effectively. So just little things like that. It's like I was saying earlier, it's not like pigeonholing people to like you need to learn a specific way, but it's like if you recognize that a child learns better in a certain way, adjusting the material to learn that way for them. And so integrative assessment is also a really big thing when it comes to diagnosing and treating learning disabilities. And integrative assessment refers to basically multiple people coming together. So like school psychologists, speech language pathologists, teachers, parents, a wide variety of people kind of like all come together in order to say like, here's what the child is struggling with, here's what they do, here's what they excel at, and here's how we can alter teaching material and other aspects of their life, like reading styles and things like that, to benefit them. So I'm going to play that YouTube video in which it demonstrates, so it's like how to, well not how to, but like it kind of like simulates what taking notes is like with dyslexia. So feel free to grab pencil and paper and ride along. She does talk very fast though, so watch out, which I'm sure that's the point.
Okay, so this is an exercise that I'd like people to have a go at home, and the idea of it is that they will have a little bit more empathy for what the dyslexic learner is going through on a daily basis. Okay, Gemma, thank you for taking part in this dictation with a difference. So I'm just going to read a couple of sentences about dyslexia to you, and I just want you to write them down. However, the rules of this game are every time the letter A appears, you need to replace it with the @ symbol. Whenever you come across an S, you need to replace it with a $sign. And whenever you come across an E, you need to make it a capital E. Okay, so we have the @ sign, the $sign, and we have a capital E. Easy. The exact causes of dyslexia are still not completely clear. But anatomical and brain imagery studies show differences in the way the brain functions. Moreover, people with dyslexia have been found to have problems with discriminating sounds within a word a key factor in their reading difficulties. So hard. Wow, well done, well done.
It was really very difficult, really hard to sort of concentrate on what I was writing. I had to keep looking at the screen a lot, and for some of it I literally had to just look at the screen constantly to work out what letters to switch in.
So I hope at the end of that, people have a little bit more understanding of what the dyslexic learner is going through in a classroom or a work environment every day, and maybe now they'll have a little bit more patience. Take someone a little bit longer, they're still going to get from A to B, they just need that time.
So did anyone like do that too? Because I just did it, and do that changed me.
It was hard to like watch the video and then write at the same time.
Yes, I watched the video, so I knew what was going to happen, but I was like, no, I'm gonna save it for the meeting when I actually like go along. and oh my goodness, like my brain physically hurts from that. I only got like 3 sentences down, if that, and it was such a struggle. And I think, and the lady was talking very fast, and I think that's like the kind of the point. Like, think of how many professors you've had that have like just flown through lecture, and you've had to like write like that. And so, and another thing that I noticed was like I would write, and I'd write the English letter, and then I'd have to like erase it and write the, you know, translated letter. And I think that's also intentional because it just shows that, like, you know, when people with dyslexia may be writing, they may write the wrong thing first, then erase it, have to write the correct one. And goodness gracious, it just really shows like what the lady had said, that, you know, just having that sense of patience that, you know, when those struggles in written and writing are like that. And if someone's just like, you know, flying through a lecture or instructions or things like that, just taking the time to be patient and to, you know, emphasize with the person. I hope that exercise kind of like helped you to emphasize, or like at least like put yourself in the shoes of someone with dyslexia. That's kind of like how my sister has described it a few times to me. I can remember her saying that like the letters lowercase b and d were like kind of hard to discriminate sometimes, or she might like, you know, write one when it should have been the other, things like that. So, you know, it's definitely applicable. So hope you guys enjoyed that. I know I certainly did, and it certainly like helps foster some empathy for me. So our last topic for this meeting is going to be communicative disorders. And so communicative disorders, as you see from the right, that's kind of like a good way to visualize it. Communicative disorders or communication disorders are like the broad category, and that's broken into speech disorders and language disorders. Speech disorders referring to like the phonology, fluency, and voice. So phonology is kind of like what we had said earlier, like the sounds of the words and how those are all comprised and put together. The fluency, the way in which we speak, and then voice, kind of like how like we get loud or we get quiet, or like we talk really fast or we talk really slow, things like that. So yeah, articulation disorders are typically are characterized by like lisp or saying like wed instead of red, so kind of like the wrong like phonemes, if that makes any sense. So like it should be the letter R instead of letter W for that English word. For voice disorders, that's characterized by like dysphonia, so just various physical abnormalities with the vocal cords, or like struggles with like their mouth and throat when producing sounds. And then fluency disorders, the most common is stuttering, so like, you know, starting up, having struggles like getting the words out, those kinds of things. Language disorders is kind of less on the production of language and more on understanding of like comprehending language. So like semantics, like word choice, knowing that hungry, the word hungry represents like a feeling of needing food, things like that. Pragmatics is like successfully communicating socially, like reading the room, kind of understanding how to get my point across effectively. Phonology, so understanding the word parts that make up a word. Morphology, can't remember that off the top of my head if I'm going to be completely honest. I know I've learned it before, so if anyone knows what that is, feel free to jump in. And then syntax is like the grammar or the way that a sentence is arranged. So then, similar to intellectual disability, early identification is really key to treatment, and like developmental milestones are also fundamental to this. So like we know that within a certain age range, children should develop, like go from saying nana to banana or tomato to tomato, you know, so there's certain like, oh, at this age they should, you know, start saying one word utterances versus like short sentences, things like that. And if they don't hit those milestones, it may be indicative of some communication disorder. Or another example would be very limited vocabulary or nonverbal language, or, you know, just be nonverbal, things like that. Treatment is often provided by speech language pathologists that, you know, give speech therapy, whether that be understanding like language comprehension or like the physical acts of producing language. You know, it's kind of like a two-factor thing going on there. Some conditions are chronic or lifelong. You know, they last until, you know, for their life. Others tend to fade away over time with speech therapy. So like Mr. Paul, he had aphasia, which is a communicative disorder, and I would have never known, you know, in which that's kind of like a point he made, was like, you know, you can't just base that off of looks. But over time with the speech therapy, that those symptoms kind of went away. So yeah, most times you can improve symptoms, but not completely remove them. And then sometimes communicative disorders are comorbid with other psychological disorders. Like for instance, someone with autism spectrum disorder may have problems with the fluency or the stuttering. So they may need to see psychologists as well to kind of like manage both areas of condition, symptoms. And kind of similar to what Mr. Paul went through, some communication disorders are the result of cognitive factors instead of difficulties in language production or comprehension. So like his aphasia was the product of his brain injury as opposed to, some difficulty in the throat or the vocal cords or something like that. So our last speaker, which might go a few minutes over, but that is Dr. Patrick Rydell, who also does a lot of things. Like, it's crazy to think that these are real people. He's a professor here at UL in the Department of Communication Disorders. He founded a treatment center and diagnostic center for autism in Colorado called the Rocky Mountain Autism Center Incorporated. He retired, so he founded and directed that, then retired from that, and then founded and directed a separate organization called Autism on Call, which is like a training and consultation affiliate of the original Rocky Mountain Autism Center. So it's kind of like provides the training on how to identify autism, the treatment for it, things like that. And some of his training series are actually free and on Vimeo. He's got like 100-something videos all about things relating to treatment and intervention for autism. So super cool. And he's also authored and co-authored multiple books and research projects pertaining to autism spectrum disorder. He even like came up with his own unique approach to the treatment, which is like, that's like super cool. So yeah, he also works around the world to provide trainings for speech pathologists, and his CV can be found on the UL Department of Communication Disorders website. Super cool guy. Peyton and I got to talk to him, and so yeah, I will show you that interview now.
Are ready. Okay, yeah, if you press the record button and we're good to go. Okay, so anyway, Wade, Peyton, great to be here. So I'm happy to answer any questions for the Beacon Club, and it sounds like a great organization.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Rydell, for taking time to speak with us. So we're going to be discussing communicative disorders, specifically, things related to speech or language impairment. And so I guess what we want to, or what would benefit the members of Beacon is how we can not only understand like what a speech communication disorder is, but how can we apply this to our own lives? How can we be better advocates and better supporters just in the lay sense? So if we were to come across someone with, something like aphasia or some other communicative disorder, how could we support them? How could we, advocate for them? And just some general things to know in that, quest to be better advocates and supporters.
Absolutely. That's a great question. Well, first of all, I think one of the things that's really important is to understand that there are many kinds of speech and language delays and disorders. And so getting to know the person first is so important. So basically, the three of us could turn off our sound right now and mute ourselves, and we can still communicate. We can still communicate non-verbally and through our gestures and our face and our body motions and things of this nature. And so we can connect, and communication is all about connection. So words, when we talk about verbal words, this here represents this. We talk about what we know. And so getting to know the person is the first thing, and don't have any a priori ideas or impressions about who that person is. Like, oh, you have aphasia, so this means you can do this and you can't do that. Or you have a stuttering issue. So that means, and then you start filling in the blank like you already know what the person is capable of doing and not doing. So getting to know the person first is so, so, so important. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to people and people are like, you know, they're talking about me right now, right in front of me, like I'm not even here. They're assuming that I don't have intelligence, or maybe I have a real significant cognitive delay because I can't talk. Well, there's a lot of reasons why people can't talk, aphasia again being one of them. Sometimes the brain is really intact, but what's the problem is that there's like a circuit breaker between what I know I want to say and what I can say. This isn't working for me. There's a breakdown in the circuitry. Or kids who have like apraxia. These are kids who are intelligent, normal, or above normal IQ, but for some reason, this isn't working right here. Your lips and your tongue and your mouth aren't working to produce sounds and words the way we normally would do it. And so what I'm saying is that you can't make judgments about people who have a communication disorder based on what you think you know. Getting to know the person first is so, so, so important, because what they want is to have confidence in this interaction with you. Wade, I just met you just now. Peyton, I know you, from last class and from the things that we've been doing. So Peyton, I know you better, and I can talk to you on a different level, and we can communicate. Wade, I just got to know you. So my job really as a patron on the street with someone who has a communication disorders is to get to know them first and get their confidence in you, that you're not going to provide any kind of judgment or an idea of what I think you're capable of doing. And confidence is everything with people who have a communication disorder. They want to be confident with you and to know that you are going to listen to them and not try to talk for them or speak for them or talk about them like they can't communicate, or they can't think correctly, or they have some kind of a cognitive delay. That's actually, Wade, the very first step in what you should do if you meet someone on the street or you're in a group. Just get to know them and sit down next to them, and you don't even have to talk. I do a lot of work internationally, and I love doing that. Peyton, you know this. I work a lot in China and Argentina, and I'm not really good at Mandarin. I mean, matter of fact, I'm horrible at Mandarin. I know a couple words, that's it. Spanish, Argentina, I know a little bit more. But what we could do is I could communicate with these people all day long and get to know them really well without saying one word. And so I would use that as an analogy for some of the folks in the Beacon Club, is to try to get to know the person first, and then later you'll find out, they'll let you know what they're capable and not capable of doing, and following their lead as opposed to making some a priori judgments about what they're capable of doing. It's a really long answer. I don't know if you're ready for that long of an answer, but that would be my first step. It would be my first step, getting to know the person.
I am so grateful that it was such a long answer, because I loved every minute of it. And I agree that it's so important to prioritize the autonomy, of others. Just with anybody, just in general, it's just a wonderful skill and approach to have.
Yeah, and you know what? And you know, Wade, it's just like anything else. Peyton, you and I have talked a lot about the community of people who have hearing disorders. And even within that community, there's a camp. What you've taught me, Peyton, is that there are some people who are like, you know what, I want cochlear implants because I want to be able to speak. Others are like, no, you know what, that's not all that important to me. I choose not to. I choose to be part of the deaf community. There's a better word for it, but speech is not all that important to me because I have other ways of communicating. And so getting to know people and how they view their life and how communication disorders may or may not affect them. I mean, you know, hey, Wade, it's just like anything else. It's like, hey, you're Democrat, Republican, if you're Protestant, Catholic, if you're black or white, I mean, you know, whatever. I mean, what's the first step? Try to get to know the person. You're going to find out eventually that you have some common ground. And you can, once you get to know a person, regarding communication, you can go to plan B, C, D pretty easily without making either one of us feel uncomfortable.
Awesome. So I guess, what would you say would be like the next step after that? Once we get to know, like, what are some ways that we could be more inclusive to those with speech or communicative disorders?
Ask them. I worked a lot with people with autism, and kids with autism, by nature of their disability, have significant issues with social skills and communication. And there's a spectrum. Some are more affected by autism, some are not. You know, we have some people who are functioning at a lower level, some at a very, very high level. But socialization and communication are the hallmarks of autism. And so, you know, these kids would be like really, really frustrated a lot. It's like, I don't get it. Why are people laughing? I don't get the joke. Or when I say something, how come you're giving me this bad look? Like, you know, like I don't know what I'm talking about. And so frustration starts to build. And so, you know, what do you do with a good partner, like boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, colleague, or whatever? One of the best things to do is not to take charge, not to say, okay, well, this is how we're going to do all this. And, you know, we're going to orchestrate this meeting this way, and we're going to include you this way, and this is how it's going to work. So you're kind of thinking for them. Instead, what I would do for the people who may be your age or a little bit older, who you meet on the street, is once you get to know them, say, okay, this meeting, this is kind of in general how these meetings go. So how is this going to work for you? I'm going to ask you, how would you prefer this meeting to go so that you can feel inclusive? You give me the strategies. I invited you, so obviously I want you to be here. I love you being here, and you need to be here. But what I need to do is I need to learn from you about how I can adjust, how I can go to plan A, B, and C, and D. So there's not really a formula as opposed to a mindset or an approach. Ask the people, and you know what? They probably would say, nobody asked me. Wow, thank you for asking me. That's awesome, thank you. And then you go, okay, now I know. Jack's here. Jack here. So my dog's in my office and wanted to go out the door. So hi everybody. My dog's name is Jack. He's in the room. So anyway, it's more of an approach way than anything else. You know, and so otherwise you get kind of nervous, like, oh, you know, what am I supposed to do with people with aphasia? What am I supposed to do with people who stutter? Like, for instance, a person who stutters might be like, okay, now I might stutter. Okay, now what did that do? That might have made you feel like, oh, so I need to jump in there and help him say the word that he's going to say. And that seems to be kind of a natural strategy because I want to help you. And people who stutter don't want to be helped. They're like, nah, don't help me. I want you to understand me. So they might say to you, just, you know what, just hang in there with me. I have repetitions, but let me finish without jumping in and talking for me. I was like, oh, I can do that. That's cool. And they would love you for it. They'd be like, wow, thank you for asking. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. You know, people who like have aphasia, as an example, on Tuesday, they're walking, talking, have, you know, a normal life. Boom, in a stroke. Tuesday night. Wednesday, their whole life changed. They can't think maybe as well as they were doing. Very disoriented. They can't pronounce words. They can't remember words. Things of this nature. This is a very, very frustrated crowd, especially like if you know anybody, maybe, I don't know if you know anybody who has a grandma or a grandpa maybe who's had a stroke, and they're very frustrated because what was very easy communicating is now very hard. So it's very likely that you want to help. Oh, grandpa, oh, I feel badly for you. Like, let me jump in and let me talk for you and things of this nature. You know, instead, you know, you just hold back, be patient, calm. Don't try to over talk. Don't try to provide all these different solutions. Just read the room. Maybe give them a pen, a pad, a pen, something to write on. How else can you communicate? Grandpa, if you can point, that's good enough for me right now. You know what? You know what, Grandpa? We don't have to talk. That's.
Oh no. All right. I think I cut off. So yeah, he was talking about with his grandpa. He's like, you know, we don't have to talk. I think we could all learn a little something from Dr. Rydell. So yeah, something that really stuck out to me from that was how he said, it's not like, oh, what do I do with someone who has aphasia? Oh, what do I do with, you know, X condition? It's more of a mindset kind of approach. So I really hope that, I know I certainly benefited from talking with Dr. Rydell, and I hope you guys did too. I think I just shared and then unshared in the matter of like half a second, so my apologies. Okay, so yeah. Okay, cool, we're back on business. And that brings us to the end. So yeah, some upcoming events. I don't know if you guys saw in the email, the UL Life Spring Fling is approaching fast. That's going to be like an outdoor dance / fun night. It's going to be a DJ, sandwiches from Jimmy John's. Hey, Miss Katie. And we're going to have a bunch of other fun things. So if you'd like to volunteer, please email me or send me a text or something like that. Follow us on social media. Give us a like and subscribe on our YouTube channel where we have our meetings. Send that link to your friends if they want to watch the meetings or couldn't be here tonight. An important thing to note is our next meeting is in 2 weeks. So instead of a month, it's going to be in 2 weeks because finals week is that first week of May. And normally we have our meeting on the first Tuesday of every month. So we're going to push it, or we're going to move it back a week. So our next meeting will be in 2 weeks. So be on the lookout for that. Our topics will be discussing various summer camps for individuals with special needs that we can apply and volunteer for. And also going to be discussing how the eco-friendly / green movement applies to the topic of disabilities. So yeah, I thought that's going to be super fun. Keep an eye on our social medias and for new events. There's actually a new one just given to me today from Caroline Meir, our vice president. It's with the Down Syndrome Association of Acadiana, and it's going to feature cooking. Like we get to be chefs, so that's going to be super fun. I'll have more details on that on our weekly email. So yeah, if you, the members, know of any suggestions, ideas, or opportunities you think Beacon Club would be interested in, please let us know. Send us an email, give us a text, things like that. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Sorry we went over a little bit, but I hope that this information was as beneficial for you as it was for me. And I hope that you guys are well in this weather. Stay safe. Keep going on the last leg of the semester. I have faith in you guys. So thank you so much for attending. Bye-bye, everybody.